join said meeting.
This time I'll call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. We have an agenda before us. Are there any changes to that agenda? If not, we'll move to agenda item number 3, which would be to consider the approval of the minutes from the regular council meeting that was held on July 10th. The council does have those minutes. Sharon, can you move us forward?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Just a technical thing. Mine did not advance.
Neither did mine.
Is your green button on?
It is.
Can I ask a question? Do we typically approve of the agenda by vote?
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
Okay.
But I'm on agenda item number 1.
Well, you haven't even gotten the 2 yet.
No, I'm on number 3 now.
I'm on 3.
Keeps telling me to select for Adobe Flash.
I can understand why Craig's having trouble.
Just watch it, pal. It's coming your way.
Okay, I'm there.
I guess.
I just did it once.
Now I get
Carpenter figures it out on this.
I get to log in again.
Even the blind squirrel sometimes finds a nut.
Hey, now it's. Have I mentioned I don't like
Would you give me a cup of coffee while you're waiting?
I could.
Craig,
Yeah, I get kicked me out. I can't even. Now let's see if it'll let me join the meeting.
You have the same little emblem down at the bottom.
I did, but it's gone now.
There you go.
There.
There you are.
Phew. Missed.
Okay, so after all that, that motion did pass.
Good thing we've got a short agenda.
That's going to be a long night. Agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is a consent agenda. We'll bring the items up on the screen that are on the consent agenda, and they include consider a special event permit for the Sounds of Summer, consider a resolution authorizing the transfer and closure of debt service funds 378, 363, 364, 367, 317, consider the approval of the contracts for National Night Out, consider the approval of a temporary 3.2% malt liquor license for the VFW Post 742, and to consider the projects and bills and the project payments. Is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants removed for purposes of separate discussion?
Move approval as presented.
Item number 6.
Item number 6 has been requested to be removed from the consent agenda. Any other item? If not, Craig, I think you were making a motion.
I move to approve.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. We'll then move to agenda item number 9, which was agenda item number 6.
I have a few questions here. It appears like the total cash that's going to be transferred is around $1 million. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, that is correct.
And then I assume the assets transferred would be, there's like another $280,000 or something. Is that receivables for special assessments, or?
That is correct.
And those receipts also would be transferred to whatever fund?
495, the Public Improvement Fund, which is our revolving public improvement fund.
And that's a capital projects fund?
That is a capital projects fund.
And so what we're going to be doing is using special assessments from one project to pay for capital projects in other areas then.
Essentially, yes.
Is the reason we have the excess funds in the debt service fund due to the fact that we levied too much for taxes for that debt service?
They are past debt services, so I don't have a lot of history on them. What I can tell you is that there's multiple reasons that it could have funds left in it. Projects come in under budget, then those funds will then come back into the debt service fund. And at the time the bond is sold, the levies are set, and so if levies weren't changed to assist for or take into account the funds being transferred back from the projects, that there could be a excess amount then.
I noticed the assets for one of the funds, this could be $521,000 is going to be transferred out of that fund, and another one, total assets like $657,000. That's a substantial amount of excess assets in a debt service fund. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. And every year we pass a resolution for the tax levy, correct?
Correct.
And in that tax levy, we have a category called special levy debt service.
Correct.
And so what we did is what wasn't being paid for with special assessment was coming, I assume, from the special levy for debt service. Correct? Okay. And the question now is, because we, in a sense, levied too much from the taxpayers, what are the excess funds? Would you agree that there's probably two possibilities here? One is transfer to a capital projects fund and spend for other projects, or use the money to pay off other debt, transfer to other debt service funds?
We could look at transferring it to other debt service funds. The reason I chose to transfer it to the capital projects fund is to based on our auditor's recommendation.
Okay. I noticed in the audit some other, these are all bonds that have matured.
Correct.
But we also have some matured bonds in the tax increment area that have matured with assets in them, evidently. What are happening to those? One of them has $118,000, and the other one has $19,000. Are we doing anything with the tax increment bonds or not?
Those were previously closed at a previous council meeting, and the council has approved those.
Good.
And
I wasn't sure.
It goes back into the tax
So
increment.
those are closed too?
Yep.
Okay. So we took care of all the matured bonds then.
That is correct.
I guess my concerns are this. As I mentioned, there are two possibilities: either pay down the debt, or put it in a capital projects fund and spend the money. Those are the options we have available to us. Now, when we went to the taxpayers, and I have the levies here for the last 4 to 5 years, and it shows how much was levied each year for debt service. So we told the taxpayers, we need this amount of money from you in taxes so we can pay off our debt. And so when we took it from them as taxes, it was with the understanding it would be used to pay off debt. And now, instead of paying off debt, we're putting it into capital projects fund where we're going to spend it for something else. And I guess my concern is this: if we take money from the taxpayers with the idea it's going to be used for paying debt, and instead of using it for paying debt, we end up using it for other capital projects, is that really the right thing for us to do? And I was looking at these levies for debt service fund, and over the last 4 or 5 years, it's usually between like $1 million and $1.3 million or something that we levy every year. If we wanted to, couldn't we use those funds next year in 2019, and it would be enough money so that we wouldn't have to levy anything for debt service? And in 1 year, we could reduce the taxes of our taxpayers and say we overcollected in prior years. To make up for that, we're going to reduce taxes next year. And we're going to catch up to where we're supposed to be. Would that be a possibility?
I would have to check with, investigate that further as far as a possibility, but I believe so.
And my feeling is this, again, we took it from the taxpayers as taxes with the idea that it would be used for debt service. And now we're looking at using it for something other than debt service. And that's kind of misleading the taxpayers. And I feel if we collect it for debt service, we should use it for debt service. And we should use it to lower the amount of city debt. And so my recommendation would be instead of transferring, and I'm all in favor of closing these funds, that they should be closed. The question is where the money should go to. And I feel that the money should be used for debt service and not for other capital projects. So it'd be my recommendation that we direct city staff to find out what we could do about the debt, using the money to pay down the debt.
Okay.
I like your idea, Glenn. The only thing I'd caution on that is there's no sense to bond next year at a higher interest rate. I'd rather see the money used next year for capital improvement projects and not bond form, because next year our interest rates are going to be higher than what our debt is now. So we're not being responsible with that money to pay off a low interest rate loan. They're loaning the money out at a higher interest rate. I get what you're saying, but that's where I think next year we go in there instead of having a $1.5 million bond. I don't know what our bond was this year. Is that about what it was?
Well, I think it was higher than that.
3.3.
We lower our bond by $500,000 and use that money there, because it makes no, like I said, it makes no sense to borrow money at 5% to pay off money at 2%.
We already have a capital improvement levy for capital items.
Correct.
And so that's already in our budget that we can use the money for that purpose. I guess I'm feeling that if we took the money from the taxpayers, I think we should return it and let them decide how to spend it and not the city. And, it's like if you have excess money in your household, do you use the excess money to pay down your credit card bill or pay down your home mortgage, or do you spend it on something else? And that would depend on what else you could spend it on and whether it was worthwhile. If you had a roof that's leaking, I'd spend it on the roof. But I wouldn't spend it on a new boat or a vacation or something like that if I had the excess money. And so, it depends on whether or not the city needs some money, and maybe we should look into this and investigate what we'll need for money next year, 2019.
And I agree with you 100% on that. And that's what I'm saying. If we build a new city hall, we'd rather use this capital improvement money toward that instead of bonding the $5.2 million. Now we can bond $4.6 million for the new city hall and save the taxpayers the money on that interest. You're right. You pay off your highest interest first, your lowest interest last. You gain the most money doing that.
And the question I have at this point, again, is like I said, I want to be honest with the taxpayers, and if we took it for debt service, we should use it for debt service. And in my mind, that's restricted money that should be used for debt service.
And by not taking out the extra money on a bond, we are using it for debt service because we're borrowing less money.
And as finance director, and the auditor's recommendation is to put this into this capital improvement revolving account, so there is that flexibility in the future to either use it for debt payment or to use it for capital to avoid future borrowing.
And
you had a point, and then Sharon.
I'll let Sharon. I'll defer to Sharon for right now because she might have information pertinent to my question.
One of the things that the council voted to proceed with this year was a long-term debt management study. This past week, we initiated the process with Abdel and Myers, and I know that the CPA met with our finance team and myself, and one of the discussions was using some of these dollars for a revolving fund, as Jim pointed out, that you wouldn't have to then bond for it, and you can use those funds. Right now, when we came forward to the council this year, we didn't feel we had enough. There just wasn't enough funds in there to do that. But as we go forward, we could look at that, and the levy sheet that's presented is a snapshot in time. It doesn't forecast out future infrastructure or debt service needs. So I think we'd have to take a look at our CIP and incorporate that into how we're going to spend the revolving funds that we're transferring into this particular fund. So I think we'll gain some advice and some counsel on that as we go forward too.
So in that regard,
Glenn makes an excellent point, and Jim makes an excellent point. I think what we need is more data. So, Carla, could you be appropriate, Mr. Mayor, to table this until we get more data from Carla and get the absolute numbers? I mean, because there's a variable that you said, Jim, that we don't know. Yes, likely interest rates will be higher next year, but that's not a guarantee. We don't know that. And so if we know the numbers, given today's numbers, because that's what we know today, does it make more sense to pay off debts today and then maybe bond for stuff next year at today's rates, knowing that that may not be valid? Or is it better to keep it in the revolving and send it to the capital improvement fund? That's what I would do.
John?
I get just a question. If we put it into fund, the 401 fund.
495. Sorry.
Okay, there's that 401. All right, 495. Does that restrict us to any one item, or we just?
No, it does not.
So really what we're talking about is parking the money someplace out of these accounts so we can close the rest of them, pull it all in one, and figure out what we want to do with it afterwards.
We certainly can.
Future action can be based on further information, including the results of the.
Yeah, and I think that kind of really does what everybody wants it to do, is use it in some appropriate area that is, the best for it. But putting it into this fund doesn't restrict us from doing anything different than that. So we can do exactly what we want by moving ahead on this, closing these accounts out, and just then deciding as we get through doing the levy, reviewing the levies, reviewing our debt service, and our capital equipment needs.
Because right now, Carla, you can correct this, but it is all parked in accounts that have no obligations, but the funds cannot be for any other purpose.
That is correct.
Until these accounts are closed. Right.
So just to be clear, if it's put into the 495 Public Improvement Fund and we decide that we want to pay current debt, still take it out of there, or a portion of it, and pay off debt.
You can do so by resolution.
Okay.
That would accomplish, I think, what everybody's been talking about. I'm ready to entertain a motion.
I just make the comment here that I guess my concern sometimes is that if the funds are available, there's a tendency to go in and spend it. We just take it out of this fund or that fund, and by having the funds available like that, it tends to increase spending. And my concern is that the money might be used to increase spending. And like I said, when we collected this in the first place, it was to be used for debt service. And if we collect it for debt service, I would like it used for debt service, because that's the commitment we made to the taxpayers. When we collected it, we said it would be used for debt service. We didn't say it was going to be used for any other project. We said it was going to be used for debt service.
Correct. And putting it into 495 Capital Improvement Project Fund requires council approval for spending as well, because it's capital expenditures. So if it is, when it is spent and how, will be based on the council's decision, not staff's. Staff's recommendation, but council's decision.
David?
Mr. Mayor, I don't think we have a motion, do we?
We do not.
I'll move that we proceed with the transfer and closures as proposed, with the, I'll take it as sort of our collective mission to look at the question, as Glenn has raised, about the debt retirement and the relationship with these funds.
Motion by David. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. And the motion passes. Thank you, Carla. Agenda item number 10. Agenda item number 10, consider the approval of the professional set design for Studio One television. With us tonight, I'll first start with Alex Peterson, our media coordinator with Studio One. Alex?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight I have with me Josh Ulian. Ulian, sorry. I'm still getting the hang of this. He's the Media Communications professor at SMSU, and we work very closely together in our programs that we work together in. We come before you tonight to request some PEG dollar use in order to get a new set in our TV studio area. If you've read through the information, you'll see that our best guess is the existing set has been there for 20 plus years by best estimate. We actually think it might be a little older than that. It has served its purpose. It's very well used, to say it nicely, and does not work well for high definition productions, which we now have in place. We've been working on trying to find a good vendor for this, a cost-effective vendor, for many, many months, and Josh did a lot of the legwork for us, which is great. And we did find two separate vendors that were very cost comparative, almost equal, actually. So we're bringing forth tonight our request for that set design, which we feel would be a really good fit for our programs with Studio One, as well as SMSU's programs that they'll be doing in the future as well. We did include a photo in case you'd like to see that, if you haven't yet. That's kind of what we're looking for. It's very durable, and it's also very customizable, where you can change out some of the graphics. You can utilize chroma key, blue screen, green screen. It gives us a really wide variety of capabilities of what we can do with that type of set design. So
And I think the thing to understand is that what we're asking for is half of this, because SMSU is going to do a state funding match for this. So it's basically half of the price of the cost.
Right. So when you look at the original cost estimate, it did say $20,000. So we're splitting that in half and utilizing, like Josh said, our 50-50 or 100% match from Minnesota State as well for a shared expense. Any questions?
Alex, specifically that's from the SMSU Foundation?
Correct.
Which is where these kinds of funds have to be processed, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
It says the quote's good for 90 days. We're a little over 90. I'm assuming the quote's still good.
It is, yeah. When we started the conversation to bring it through our cable commission, it was several months ago. It does sound like they would still honor that quote. But thanks for noticing that.
Other questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Discussion? I would just say it's a well-needed improvement. I think those of us that have done programs there, you know, if you're on a chair with wheels on it, and if you go back 6 inches to the side too far, Craig, you will.
Yeah, you could.
I was going to say.
You could tip over.
Yeah, you could. Very easily.
But no, it's very good. And
Gotta bring that up.
other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote.
It's a good thing that's the worst thing I've done, huh?
Motion does pass.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 11. Agenda item number 11 is the City of Marshall tax abatement policy. With us tonight representing the recommendation from the Economic Development Authority is Economic Development Director Tara Onken. Tara?
Hi, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me tonight. What I have here for the Council to review and discuss is a draft City of Marshall tax abatement policy. This was something that the EDA had started discussions on probably late last summer or last fall. And then we learned that the county was also considering a tax abatement policy. So the EDA sort of said, let's wait and maybe see what they do, just for ease of if two programs are implemented, we wanted it to be easier for the public to realize how that works. And then we also looked at different, like Pipestone County, Gallatin has an abatement, Tracy has an abatement. So what we did is we took a lot of the information and put it together, and the EDA board had some, what I feel is really good discussions on that. So what you have in your packets tonight is a draft policy for you guys to discuss, review. Any feedback would be welcome. What is on the table or what is being proposed is that the city council or the city would abate 2 years, 100% of city portion of taxes on a new build, and to be eligible for this program, it would be new construction of single family or multifamily, like a duplex, or up to 12 units. And then anything that falls outside of those parameters could be, they're not subject to this policy. They could be visited, outside of that if it was something that the council felt. So if everybody has reviewed this, does anybody have any questions or initial thoughts on how the program works? And
before we get to questions, any input from the EDA representative? Okay.
Just about the only comment I'd make is we looked at, like Tara said, all the other communities, what they've been doing and what the county did, and said, well, try to make it very simple and do a very simple 2-year, 100%, a lot less calculation, a lot less, is it okay, what percent, what month, whatever. So I really tried to simplify it. This is what we came up with.
Thank you, John. Questions?
Now, under this policy, it's the only increase in taxes that's abated, not if there's taxes on the property already, that doesn't get abated.
so that's a consideration that the council could discuss tonight. The way that the policy is written is because it has to be new construction. So right now, if there's a vacant land parcel, the difference or the increment would be very minimal, where it would take, it might even be like $10 or $20. It would probably take more time to figure out the increment than to, do that. So the abatement, the way that it's written, and it could be subject to whatever you guys discuss, is that it would just abate the 100% of the city portion of taxes, whatever that is.
The reason I look this over a second, it talks about the city's share of increased. So in the policy itself, it talks about increased taxes. And I know a number of other cities or counties, it's only the increase in taxes that it's abated, not what's on the property right now, which would be the land taxes. And so I know I have one from the city of Leroy here that they make it very clear that real estate taxes collected for the value of the land or any current additional structure values not eligible for tax abatement will not be abated as part of this program. So they specifically said the land that's on there right now, the taxes for that will not be abated. Only the taxes for the increase in value.
Yep, that is one consideration that the council could make tonight, and the other one that the EDA wanted to bring forth to council is if an application fee, if you decide to proceed with this, what would an application fee look like? Would we want to charge an application fee to cover the advertising expenses as far as notice and such, or would we not? That's kind of for the council to discuss which direction they would like to go with it.
And I noticed that some of the other policies, they specifically mention that it does not include special assessments.
Right.
So you're still, and so it's evidently they felt it was good to include that there because they don't want taxpayers or others to have a misunderstanding as to exactly what's abated.
Yep.
So, like I said, a number of them in their policy specifically said we're not going to abate any special assessments. So that might be something to consider. Another one, Austin, Minnesota, they said if you don't have construction within 1 year of approval of the application, you have to reapply. So that it doesn't go on and on and on, and that they apply, get approved, but take forever to get construction started. Mm-hmm. Another policy said if you refuse the assessor access to your property, which is a good one, then the abatement expires right then. There is no abatement. So if you're going to be unreasonable and not let assessors come in and look at your property, then the special benefit is going to expire for you. Mm-hmm. We talked, I think Council Member Lazinski brought something, a revision to the policy about partial construction. And it was a late addition to the policy. And
we believe we made the changes that suggested preliminarily for the council to review. So I think those...
I saw that in the 2:30 email.
Yes, yeah.
And I can see his point there. I do notice that cities like Marshall, or not Marshall, but Austin, Minnesota, they said, doesn't matter. It's the 2 years, whether it's partial or full construction, you get the 2 years and that's it. So I'm just showing that some are doing it that way too. I noticed that in just about every policy they looked at, they have a paragraph that talks about tax abatement availability. And it's standard language in every one of those policies, but it's not in ours.
I think that some of those would reference in the Minnesota statute where it refers back to that. Some of that language is found in the statute. So if you want that incorporated right into the document, we can certainly do that. One thing that I mean, the more simple we can keep the document, that's obviously our goal, but we want it to be as clear as possible and as easy as possible for residents to understand.
And the reason I bring that up is if all those other counties and cities are doing it, maybe they're doing it for a reason, maybe we need to consider it too. And one of the things that they put in there specifically was the statutory language about a limit, that there's a limit to what the cities are allowed to abate. And like I said, that's kind of a common provision in each one of these. And I think Leroy, Minnesota, Austin, Minnesota, Pipestone, Moore County, and so forth all had that. One that Pipestone had in was a first in, first out type of thing, that if we're going to limit the amount of abatement, it's on a first come, first served basis. So, again, I don't know if that's just common sense or what, but they thought that it was important enough to include in their provision. In the policy itself, it talks about the abatement, and it talks about for a period of 4 years. But then later it talks about the 2-year abatement. So you got both 4 years and 2 years in the policy, and that might be confusing to people. You know what I'm saying?
Can I clarify that? The application period is 4 years. The abatement is 2.
Right.
So at the end of the 4th year, there'll be consideration. Do we continue an open application period, or do we end it? That's the 4-year and the 2-year.
And what I'm reading here is it says they may be eligible to receive a tax abatement for a period of 4 years. That's the language.
We can clarify that language. That's fine.
Right, and so that's what I thought was confusing there. And if it's just for the application, then we should maybe say so, but make it very clear to everyone this is a 2-year period of time. And I do notice that we can have up to, 15 years? And I see some are going 2 years, 5 years, 15 years. And evidently, you decided that was 15 or 2 years would be the best. There's no income limitation then, right? No matter how expensive your house or how much money you make, you're entitled to a tax abatement.
Right. If it's single family, it falls underneath those parameters of a single family home or multifamily up to 12.
I think some right now interest rates are really low. I know when my wife and I built our first house, we borrowed money at 15%. I don't know anybody that borrowed money at more than 15% to buy or build a house. And then when it went down to 10.5%, we refinanced. But we're at historically low interest rates, which makes it a very beneficial for people building houses. And it's likely, as we talked about here tonight, that interest rates are probably going to go up eventually. And I don't know how high, but normally they're a lot higher than they are right now. And so what we're saying basically is if you, within this 2-year period of time, 2.5 or whatever, because it expires, it's effective till December 30, the application period's for about 2 years, isn't it? And so if you were to build after that 2-year period, not only would you not get the benefit of the reduced taxes, but you'd be stuck with higher interest rates and higher monthly payments on your mortgage. And so you can see that I would think that low interest rates would be good enough to encourage people to build at this time or buy something, because they are historically low, and they're likely to go up. And is it really fair to the people 2 years from now to say you're not going to get a reduction in taxes and you're going to pay higher interest rates, but that's tough. You weren't one of those that had able to apply within that 2-year period of time. Would that be fair to the other home builders?
Mr. Mayor, a couple things. First of all, I think that we would have the option as a council when this time period, we could always extend it. We would have the ability to come back, and if it seemed appropriate, we could do it again. The question that I have regarding the 2 and 4 year is that the abatement doesn't kick in until the second year after construction, correct? So we capture the full value of the new construction, and then it goes for 2 years. That's the 4, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that's
Jim?
I read through this, and part of the reason, Glenn, why I suggested the 2 years is, and this is a question that needs to be clarified for you, is we built spec houses. That way, that can get transferred to the new owner, correct? Then,
Right.
then the developer himself is not capturing that. It's a selling point to bring in families into Marshall. Because it's a point, so, we have this houses that have this abatement. It's part of where, income levels within your developers are not capturing that property tax advantage. The other thing I looked at in here, Tara, is line 2. I think line 2 should be completely removed. Simply because we as a city council control TIF financing anyway. So if we approve a TIF area, we can at that point say if somebody's building a 12-plex and wants TIF financing, well, then you don't qualify for the abatement because you're getting TIF.
By statute, you can't have both.
Correct. So and I don't think it's the worry of the city of Marshall if somebody's getting a grant from the state or somebody else for workforce housing or small city. That's not our problem.
I still think it's good to have it in there, though.
I don't, because we need to bring in workforce housing. I can tell you right now that the biggest complaint the businesses have is they do not have young workers to work in Marshall. And this is another incentive, another tool for the EDA to say to young couples, you can do this, you can build a house and come to Marshall. I was just talking to Sharon before we started the council meeting. I could add 5 more employees to my crew right now. They are not here. We don't have the employees, we do not have the people. To keep Marshall growing, we need to get the people to town. And I've been harping on Cal for 4 years to get me people. He says, where? You tell me how, Jim. This gives the EDA another tool, and if we throw a bunch of restrictions on it, then that tool does not get taken out of the toolbox.
But the restrictions are
Restrictions there, we're being upfront about it.
statute, right?
No, the workforce housing, TIF is fine. I'm saying the workforce housing small cities grant,
The other part beyond TIF.
beyond TIF, yeah.
Okay.
That's why the statute's there.
I'm not sure on the workforce housing, but I know that TIF and tax increment can't be used at the same time. So I can check on the other two.
Good point. John, you had a point?
I guess just a couple of things that we've been talking about. One, again, is the whole idea of this thing is an incentive. We're trying to get construction, we're trying to bring in people, whatever, at least get some construction going as well. We're doing this over a longer period of time, so just like Jim said, developer could be the one that does it, reduces the price, maybe not, but it really is intended to go to the homeowners and get those, allow the home to be built, the home to be sold, and then they can start, make the application and get their abatement. So we're trying to keep, again, very simple, not a lot of rules, just get an incentive out there and see what we get. And if it looks like we can encourage something, then yeah, we can decide to do it more. Or that didn't work as well. Okay, we tried that. Let's see what else we can do. So
What I've noticed in other communities is that if somebody's considering a project but they're not really for sure, and then there's just one thing that'll make them pull the trigger, and then you have that permanent dwelling unit or permanent tax base for the life of the project. I've seen it be successful in other communities right here in our area.
The one thing I wanted to mention, in addition to the policy, is just a little bit more on procedure. And I think the intent is obviously to keep it simplistic, but statutorily we do have to have a public hearing for each abatement. And then typically the abatement is adopted by resolution. And most abatement resolutions have the provision that the abatement can be modified or terminated at any time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's safeguards in place in addition to the policy that gives discretion to the council on granting an abatement, even though you don't want to thwart the merits of the policy, which is encouraging home construction in the city of Marshall.
Any other questions for Tara?
I'm all for keeping things simple. I tell my students, keep it simple. Because it's simple, it's going to be easier to understand and easier to remember. But at the same time, you have to be complete. And if there's certain, people aren't going to look up the statutes. They may look up the policy, but they're not. I don't think they're going to go looking at the statute. And so if there's certain provisions that are really important, they should be in the policy. And I look at other cities and other counties, and they have certain provisions in there for a reason. I don't think they're trying to be wordy. I think they're trying to just make sure that there's complete disclosure, that people know all the facts, and that if they have questions, pretty much the policy, they can go to the policy and find the answers to what they have questions about. And if council wants to approve or not approve of something, we can refer back to the policy and say, this is our policy and we need to follow the policy. So you want to keep it simple, but you also want to have a complete policy that has adequate information for people reading it.
I'm willing to add in whatever you guys want. This was just a draft to bring to you guys for discussion, so absolutely we can add in whatever or change or modify whatever you guys want if you guys decide to approve this.
What are the wishes of the council?
Well, if she's going to change it, well, there really isn't a motion. It's to have it redrafted, isn't it?
Well,
the option
but
would,
what do you want me to add in specifically? Yeah.
Well, the option would be to adopt the policy with some recommended changes,
Right.
or to take no action and refer this back to EDA for additional work based on the discussion here. Not sure that's going to change the policy a lot. It'll probably change some of the length of the wording of it, but Steve and then Jim.
My concern, Councilmember Bear-Kohler, you say that people aren't going to look at the statute. People don't read the policies as it is. And if you're interested in it and you refer to the statute, now it's not like, first off, not many people are lawyers. You are a lawyer, so you dig deep. We all know that. If you're interested, the statute's referenced, and so you can just click on it, copy, paste, and boom, it pops right up in the Minnesota State, and it's all there. So.
And if somebody has a question and we can't answer it, we will find the answer, help them get the answer that they're looking for.
Well, and that is the point is that if someone is interested in participating in this, they'll be in contact with your office, and then you will work with that person so that they understand this program as well as any other opportunities that might be available.
I'm sure the builders, developers will be making themselves quite versed in it also, because it's part of their marketing tool to build in the first place.
Absolutely. If the city did decide to implement something like this, we would make sure that all of the contractors or spec builders would be aware, as well as the realtors in town, because they're really working with people who are looking to build or looking for a lot to build on. So we would make sure that we would get that information out there to as many people as possible. This one as well as the Lyon County one. They would complement each other very nicely, I think.
I guess I'm putting a motion that we adopt this with the changes, especially to line 2, if appropriate and fitting with the statute, to take workforce housing and small city development program out of that, leaving tax increment financing / TIF in place.
Perfect. And then with an application fee?
I'm not in favor of an application fee.
Perfect.
I would second that if we can add one thing to it, Craig, and it says program approval is attained for building permits pulled beginning after July 24th. So that takes away that gray area of construction or building permits.
Okay.
For building,
I'm good with
on
that.
number 5 for building
building
permit?
permits pulled, so that's cut and dry. Your permit signed on July 23rd, you're just out of luck.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the motion.
I would second if you accept.
Yeah, I accept that.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Now discussion on the motion.
When you send the application form to the individuals that request it, I would assume you'd send the policy with it, wouldn't you?
100%. That's not
Right.
even a question,
So,
yes.
I mean, that's something they're going to receive that's available that they can read.
These 3 pages would be in a PDF, and I would send it out to them, or if they pick it up or whatever, it would be all as one.
So the idea is that things that are important should be in there so that they can look at it before they even apply.
Right.
And that's, again, why I feel like you need a complete policy, because that's what they're going to rely on, and that's the information that they need. And as far as an application fee, is there something wrong with an application fee, or what are others charging as far as application fees?
Do you know what Pipestone County did?
No.
We're selling a building permit.
Yeah, they did not. I don't believe Ballatin does. I don't believe Tracy does. and the county, they had some really good discussions on it. I don't think they ended up implementing one either.
So it's not like the city's out of a line and not charging one?
Correct.
No, because we do not charge a fee when they homestead houses either, do we?
No.
Because when you buy it from a developer, you're going to have to homestead it. So it's 2 applications at one time.
That's actually handled by the county.
Other discussion on the motion?
We discussed this before, but so what is the final answer here? Does the abatement apply to the entire value, the entire tax amount that the city's collecting, or is it only the increase in value because of the new construction? I don't know if it reads that way, because
It says the city's share of increased real estate taxes as a result of building newly constructed. So I read that the land tax stays. That's what the initial, that's the way I read that paragraph.
that's the way I would read it too.
David, and you're doing taxes, how much more work is that going to create to separate these up? I mean, let's ask the man who has to do this if it's cost effective.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Unlike probably previous abatements or TIFs even, they all go to the county auditor and it's done there. All of this work would be done by city staff. So we would have to do the math on each individual parcel every year to calculate that difference. So for the ease of simplicity, we just decided to do, the intent I believe was 100%. So
Then we would need to remove the increased. And I'm okay with that. I'm
okay with that too. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, David.
That's clarified in the motion.
Greg, you want to clarify that new motion? I'll clarify
My motion is to adopt the policy as presented with the following corrections or changes: to remove the workforce housing and small cities development program citation from item number 2 under eligible participants, and then also, excuse me, in the 4th line of that same, of the paragraph under eligible participants, to remove the word increased under share of increased real estate taxes to read share of real estate taxes.
I'll still second that.
Thank you.
No discussion on that motion.
The final question I have is this set up so the tax abatement will start on year, as I read up there, year 3, or year 4, or year 5, so they get 100% of the value, correct?
That's the intent of the program, yes.
Okay.
Other discussion on the motion?
I know that, so the city assessor's office, so after they've had the property for 4 years or whatever, generally all real estate will be going up in value, or a lot of it will be going up in value. So the question then is the amount that is abated based on the original value or whatever it is during this 4-year period? Because I know, in like Ossipee, Minnesota as an example, they use the term original value, which means we'll abate the amount on the original value of the improvements. But because of inflation and other things, increases, that's going to be passed on to the taxpayer. So what is it in this case here? Is it based on original value, or whatever their taxes, no matter what they are during that 2-year period, they're going to be abated? That's the question.
Correct. Just before I answer that question, I just want to give one disclaimer here. I'm not here to promote this policy or to argue against it. I'm just giving the facts. If it passes, this is what you may expect. So don't take it as I'm trying to promote this or vice versa. But you are correct, Glenn, that if there were market increases due to sales or that would, in this policy, follow through with that abatement.
I
It would be
believe
abated.
also by resolution. I think when the resolution is adopted on a specific parcel, it has an estimated abatement amount, and what other communities have done is say when it's passed, you have an estimated abatement amount of $5,000. So that abatement for that parcel is not to exceed $5,000 or whatever that is. It's set at the time of the resolution. So if there is a crazy increase in market value, that's sort of planned for ahead of time. in the resolution per
Right.
parcel.
But I mean, that's not in our policy here, that we would do something like that.
That would be in the resolution. So it could be incorporated into the policy if you so choose, but otherwise I believe by state statute when you do, and Dennis, you can jump in if you know off the top of your head, but I remember going through this in Ballatin is that when we adopted a tax abatement policy for each parcel, we had to list the estimated amount of what we expected or anticipated that abatement to be.
But the policy written here does not have any kind of limitation. And so.
Yeah, it does. It does.
But the $20,000 amount.
20,000.
Yeah, that's the only limitation. But that.
2 years and
but
20,000.
But each parcel, there's no limitation on the amount. And so if my house goes up in value, I pay the increase in taxes. These individuals, if their house goes up in value, not because of their improvements, just because of inflation, they don't pay the increase in taxes. And what's happening here is these individuals are getting free city services and not having to pay for it, whereas the average taxpayer out there is paying for those city services. And you know, the question is that fair to the other taxpayers that we end up paying for all the city services, where these people end up not paying for them because they don't have to pay the city portion of the tax.
For 2 years, right?
For 2 years.
Then they come in.
But you got to look at, you build a new house, you have $100,000 material put to that house, you pay $7,500 in sales tax with the city's capture some of that. When you built your house, there was not a city sales tax. So, you know, yes, they're getting city services, but there are other taxes that they're paying now. The world isn't fair, plain and simple. And we talk at the increase, well, what happens if the value drops? That happened in 2008, 2009, 2010. So we're going to set up a policy, so if this value drops, when I brought this up, I meant this to be simple, clear cut, to not have Dave in his office spending 200 hours figuring this out, because we're not saving anything at that point. So I just think a simple, clear-cut thing. You can have values go up, you can have values go down. And yes, they're getting an advantage, but they're also building a $250,000 house, $300,000 house, which 1% of it is $3,000, or the city sales tax is 5%. You know, 0.5%. So they're paying into that. Is that fair that my house is built without that, but theirs is? So, I mean...
Well, it's really designed as an incentive.
It is.
To get people
For
here.
development, and it's for a limited amount of time. That's the reason not to do it 15 years.
Right.
Well, and I think it's also important to remember that that house is, we're not just generating property taxes at the time of construction. We're getting connection fees for utilities. Assessments are paid off on the lot at the time of transfer of the lot to construct. We're going to continue to collect water and wastewater fees, stormwater fees. So, I mean, I think that this is a good incentive. I think it needs to be viewed as an incentive, and it's 2 years. It's one of the best arguments I heard is if somebody's going to go in and buy a spec house, and one of the factors is that, you know, okay, we're trying to get started here. This is our first time home. We're buying it. We don't like the color of the carpet. We don't like the color of the walls. There's enough in here. We're going to save on property taxes. We can make this house the way we want it. Move in. Year 4, the assessor walks back through, says, my goodness, you guys cleaned this up a little bit. Looks pretty nice. I think we're going to raise the value a little bit more, and that's the time the city's going to start collecting taxes. So, I mean, I think we could talk about scenarios about fair and unfair. I think the decision is that we thought it was a good idea to follow suit with some other entities and offer an incentive and try to stimulate some of the more construction and more families to get a workforce here. I think it's a good program, and I'd ask the mayor to call the question.
Question's been called. We will move to a vote on the question of calling. Sharon, that's correct. Parliamentary procedure.
Correct.
Moving the question. So all those in favor of moving the question? Well, we'll do this by voice vote.
Well, basically what we're doing is limiting debate then, right?
Exactly. We'll do this as a voice vote. All those in favor of moving the question?
Aye.
By saying aye. Those opposed, motion passes. Note the one, then we move immediately to
Thank you.
the vote. So we'll move to the vote. And that motion does pass. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Dave.
Now, this,
is, we just passed the motion. So now we'll move to agenda item number 12. This is the runway overlay project. There's a change order to consider with Dunick, the contractor. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This change order involves the milling and overlay of the crosswind runway. The south half of it had extensive crack sealing on previous lifts, and when it was milled off, it tore the rubber sealant out below. So there needed to be a leveling course put on over those cracks. We reduced then the overlay portion in accordance with the leveling portion, so that you can see that the actual change order was about between $10,000 and $11,000 for the entire change order with the pluses and minuses. We're still within the 5% contingencies as authorized under the project, and is eligible for the full state and federal funding. Would recommend approval.
Questions?
I have a question. When they bid this project, those cracks would have been in the runway.
Below the top surface. So there are cracks in the top, but then underneath that layer, there are additional cracks that they can't see that. So when they did the milling, it actually pulls the rubberized sealant out of the crack, and so there's a leveling course placed over that, those cracks that the sealant has come out of.
But that sealant is put on the cracks on top. I mean, there's no way for them to anticipate this?
That's correct.
Why?
Because, when there's several layers of asphalt, the cracks that are on the original layers don't automatically come forward to the top. So there are more cracks on the bottom layer than there would be on the surface layers.
So this has been milled several times, and these are cracks from 30 years
They've
ago
been
that you milled
overlaid
over
several
them.
times. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that brings up the question, the record of that? I mean,
No.
why would there be a record
Crack
of that?
sealing, there isn't a record.
We don't authorize payment for crack sealing? You don't write a check to, your department doesn't write a check to somebody to?
We do, but we don't measure every crack. We measure the total length of cracks, but not the location of them on each set of cracks. So, no, we don't, that's not included in our bidding procedure for the mill and overlay.
But if you've written, if you know there's cracks, follow my logic here, if you know there's cracks and you've paid for them, even if you didn't do it, the contractor would be assuming that when they mill it again, they're going to go deep and they're going to pull those old cracks up, correct?
Correct.
So if you know you've got X feet of crack that you repaired in 1997, and you're going to go deep enough to get down there, then that should be part of the bid, because I'm going to rip up these cracks.
Right. And it is not.
Glenn, related to that, so the contractor doesn't add a certain amount to the bid price based on the fact that there's going to be uncertainties. You know, we're going to run into extra work, and so we're going to cover that with the bid.
No.
Instead,
There's a bid
if they come into uncertainties,
and overlay it.
right? But if they come up with uncertainties like that, then their approach is to come and ask for a change order,
That's correct.
and that's the normal process we always use.
Yes, and it is within the 5% contingencies that when we estimate the job, we estimate 10% contingencies. And after the bid, that is reduced by half, because you know that there's going to be some changes. Sometimes it's even minus. You've seen those, but very rarely. Okay, but we do keep in some contingencies, because once you get your federal grant, that's it. That maximum stays where it is, and if we went over that amount, that entire share is local. So we do try to be honest with our contractors as far as what we're expecting to see out there. I'll give you an example. The north half of the runway, we didn't have to do that because that was a newer section. And so you don't know exactly what you're going to find underneath those cracks, underneath the top surface. And Yes, I think you could do that. You could say, okay, we had 15,000 lineal feet of cracks below there. We know that we're going to pull that rubberized crack seal out. So figure $10,000 worth of extra leveling course to do that. Then you mill it, and gee whiz, that extra didn't come out. But now it's in the bid. So we would rather see it, okay, what is it that you really have out there when you do the mill? So it costs a little bit more, yes, but for $10,000, separated 90%, 5%, 5%, it really isn't a significant amount of change orders.
Is this something that could be put in the bid documents that if there's this unforeseen event or something happens that would increase the cost, then this is what you would charge us to fix it? Is that something that would be normally put into like a bid document or not?
Not normally. The first part of that statement is included. If you run into unforeseen circumstances, it's normally handled either by labor and materials as a force account work or by a change order amount with current unit prices in the contract. And we like the current unit price in the contract because that is already been bid competitively. So this is the way we do recommend doing it. I don't mind the idea of, okay, when we go to the next mill and overlay project, knowing that this is really the only area we have significant rubberized sealant used. It's very expensive, and we do that process about every 2 or 3 years on different portions of the runway, depending upon the grant request and allowance that we've been given. And that's what this is. We couldn't really do this on our own. This is a federal, state, local participation that's mostly federal. And this is how they recommend to do it.
With the change order, then, the $10,000, cities pay all of the change order. The federal and the state government already have participated and will help pay for that.
They will help pay for this because it's within our contingency and our maximum grant.
So 95% is going to be paid else.
Yes, it will.
So the total amount we're talking here is quite...
It's not very much.
No, but I mean, when you consider that's only 5% of the amount.
Yeah, $500.
I mean, when you consider 100%, that the change order is fairly expensive then.
Well, it is. I won't say it's chump change, but, you know, the contract is for $600,000 too.
Yeah.
Other questions?
So just to clarify, what it actually is going to cost the city is approximately $505.
Yeah.
Now that I have that relief upon me, I will move approval of the change order.
Motion by David. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by John. Discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote.
I got voted out. I'm sorry.
It's your turn.
I know, it's my turn.
Could I ask a
No, it's just the left side of the
question?
table.
Yes.
Just
Operator
I
error
wouldn't
again.
get too carried away yet.
10,000 is the total increase.
Yes, it is.
And then we pay 5% of that.
That's correct.
So with regard to the federal government or state, do they have to approve this then too, or somehow do we have to
No,
go
it's
back?
already included in
Vote is still
the
underway.
total amount that they've agreed to pay for, as long as those change order items are reasonable and expected.
So it doesn't have to go for them for any additional approval then?
They won't be signing
Mr. Mayor,
off
point
on
of order. A vote is still underway. I don't think we should have further discussion until the vote has been closed.
I'm getting in there. You had to close everything.
Whatever the circumstance.
I was trying not to waste time.
Glenn, that's the wrong way to do it.
Should be.
Go join. Get join up there. There you go. From cruise control.
Motion passes. Agenda item number 13. Agenda item number 13 is a request for out-of-state travel for the Mid-America Association of State Transportation officials in Traverse, Michigan. Questions the council may have about this?
As I read this, there's no cost to the city except Glenn's wage, correct?
Correct.
And you're going to donate that back to a charity.
I probably do anyway.
Disregard that last part.
I would entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Jim. Discussion. I think it is noteworthy that, Len, what is your official capacity with that organization?
I'm president of the City Engineers Association in Minnesota, and in doing so, there's 2 conferences that they like to send us to. One is this one, another one is in Atlanta at the same time. So we chose the one that was a little bit closer.
Just, Glenn, one time to go to vote here,
Yeah.
you should, as one of the last actions as president, is have them put City Registered Engineers Association of Minnesota so that you guys can be the cream.
It is the registration
Okay.
that's important.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 14
Thank you for that.
is Commission Board Liaison Reports. Regional Development Commission had their annual meeting in Nobles County. A successful annual meeting. Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Merit Commission met last week, and we're continuing to move forward with re-looking at the ordinance and the bylaws, doing some cleanup there, getting the organization kind of tightened up. And then there's also a discussion that's going to be coming forward with some of the changes that are coming through with CVB and some other things. There's been a discussion about looking at the possibility of some additional duties for the director there, or not director, what's the word I'm using?
Coordinator.
Coordinator, that's correct, thank you. There's also been discussion about, is there room here for us to have some part-time out there, and maybe looking at, is there, as like a receptionist or an admin. And the thought is that the merit board would like to enter into the discussion with the city administration about, is there a place for some shared FTE pieces doing that? And part of it is to have someone there to do the basic hosting and kind of some of the base needs coordinations when there's people there, so that Jasmine, the coordinator, can go out and do other things and not have to be on campus that entire time. So there's the good news is there's the growing pains. The bad news is that, of course, that always means that we're trying to increase our scope a little bit. But part of that too is also coming with moving forward with the build out now, the last part of the track, and kind of getting coordinated with all of that now that we got the bonding bill this year. And so I know that there's efforts there that are going to involve engineering and some meeting again with the architect and the engineering firm that did the first portion of the track. So there's a lot of energy there, pretty exciting, but it's going to, it's going to be some more requests for some more improvements in organization out there too as we move forward. So hopefully it supports itself, but we'll continue to bring those reports forward to the council. That's all I have.
Community Services didn't meet, Cable Commission didn't meet, EDA met. I'll take a couple of things, and John, I'll defer the other to John. One of the bad news things is that Parkway 2, we had bids that we put out for auction basically, and not one. So that's kind of disturbing when not one person bids for the land, and the opening bid was what, $10,000. So when we end up, when the EDA makes recommendation to council and we come with a recommendation from the EDA to sell them for $2,000 or $4,000, that's probably going to be the going rate of the land. So there's Mickey Mouse saying $639. That's all I have.
When you said about lowering the price, are you saying lowering the minimum price and still have an auction, or
well,
just
you could still have an auction, but you at $10,000 for a lot, that's a pretty good deal, and that's the opening bid. Now nobody did it, so now we would drop it down, yes, to a lower.
But it would still be an auction type of thing or not?
We'd have to think about that. Probably not.
My commissions have not met.
MMU did meet. I was not able to attend the meeting, but did get some information on that. Good news is that our building plans for the water softening enhancement project is now certified and qualified to receive the $7 million grant. However, the state the Public Facilities Authority has got us on hold as far as going out for any bids because the state of Minnesota Management and Budget Office has not moved forward in selling the bonds to finance these grants that we're trying to go after. There's some discussion there as far as where does that money come from to pay for the bonds that they're selling. And the source was coming from the Environmental Trust Fund rather than the traditional state fund, and there's some opposition of using that Environmental Trust Fund money now to pay for the bonds. So we are on hold waiting for some resolution on that as to although it's been authorized to sell the bonds, they're not really sure what they're going to use to pay it back. So until the state straightens that out through MMB, we can't do any more. But the good news is that our plans are complete, our plans are approved. We have gone as far as we possibly can in preparing for application for this grant. So. EDA, like Steve mentioned, a number of things going on there. We did get our small cities grant awarded. We also sold slightly over half an acre of land at Parkway 3 to business within Marshall. EDA is working on the budget and 2019 EDA agreement with the chamber. Also the 2019 strategic plan, and then we had a short discussion on the Broadmoor Valley Mobile Home Park. So that's it for EDA. Thank you, John.
I could have a question for him.
Yep.
So with regard to that half acre that was sold to an existing business in Marshall, you said.
Mm-hmm.
So would that be just a relocation or is that an expansion?
No, it was adjacent to their property, and they wanted to pick up some additional land before everything was completed. So it is adjacent to their property now.
Okay, so eventually it would be expansion.
The hope is, eventually it'd be an expansion. But yes, they'd prefer to capture that. It's actually a very odd shape of land because it's rather triangular. And so in one sense, it's kind of nice. It squares off things for us and moves it. And they wanted that. They know there's going to be a sidewalk through there too, so it's going to really get chopped up more. But yet they wanted it to kind of complete their lot. So.
And it is detailed in their minutes.
Yeah.
David?
None of my boards have met in the last cycle. The City Hall Working Group will be meeting again with the architects next month and hope to have some more information for you all at our second meeting in August.
Jim? We'll move then to agenda item number 15. Councilmember individual items. Jim, let's start in your end.
A couple of things I have. Since our rainstorm, obviously, we had that 3 weeks ago, but there was a backup of water out by the Marshall Truck Wash, and I think the county, the city, and I think we're all working well together to resolve that. I know Craig has been involved with these emails. The backstory is the owner of the truck wash contacted myself and Craig Schaefer about water not running through there. It wasn't running. And at that point, we forwarded to Sharon and Jason Anderson, I think Glenn's office. And it just shows that government can work together well and resolve a problem. I think you guys are coming up with a resolution fairly quickly to try and alleviate that for future.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
And then that leads to Commissioner Sano stopped me last week, and he asked, how come we don't do Lyon County City Council meetings anymore? I've never done it since I'm on the council, so I can't answer that question. I guess, is that something that we should look into doing with Lyon County, or?
Well, I think I reported previously that I met with Chair Paul Groupman, and I did talk about that here, and we kind of agreed on what an agenda would be, and quite honestly, we have not been able to find an available time to meet, and mainly because of our schedule, the council members, and as we all know, I mean, we have a difficult time, because you're all working, we have a difficult time finding a time for a special meeting, so it was looking like, would have to be probably after our budget workshops were completed, and also now we're at election time, so it might just well wait till
January. And I'm fine with that.
I would encourage Commissioner Sandall. He certainly can call me and tell him the same thing that I told Paul too. And Paul and I both agreed on that. So.
And that's fine. And the last thing is again, I'm a pick on Craig because he always says government works at the speed of government, but I think with the tax abatement policy, it shows that as a city council, if we put our minds to it, this stuff can move along and not drag out. And I appreciate that. I like to get stuff done and keep moving. That's just who I am.
Thank you. David?
Mr. Mayor, 4 quick items. First, in the wake of the July 3rd storms, I've been hearing from constituents who are most adversely affected in Ward 2 and the concentration of residences around South 1st Street and George and Lucille, working with Bob Van Moore and his information. He has a color-coded map which indicates specifically the locations that had sewer backups. In the process of talking with several of the neighbors and doing a little bit of a door-to-door survey, because Bob suspects, and I think he's right, that some of the affected properties we haven't heard from, so before we can start figuring out potential remedies or fixes to that immediate neighborhood, we need to have the best understanding we can of the scope of the impact. So that's one project I'm working on. The Broadmoor Valley Mobile Home Park Residents Association had the visit several of us were at, the walkthrough last month, which got some attention in the local press. And then the association had a follow-up meeting about a week later, which I attended at their invitation. They were comfortable with that. So I'm continuing to talk with them and see what we can do to move progress there. Third, coming up tomorrow and Thursday, I'll be in Mankato at the summer conference of the Greater Minnesota Cities Coalition, representing our area there, and we'll be honored to receive a recognition at their awards banquet Thursday evening, so look forward to that. The one problem, the hats we all get to wear around here, the family will not be there because it's good news, bad news, mostly good news. My son's baseball team is in its playoff final that evening, so I'll be getting updates. And finally, next week, Tuesday, several of us from Marshall will be meeting with a couple of the key policymakers in the Minnesota legislature, and the heads of the transportation committees, to talk about ways that we can find some remedies, we hope, or suggest some, for the language in the corridors of commerce policy, which led to the unfortunate outcome of the Metro Heavy Awards this spring. So perhaps there are some remedies that could be pursued there. That's all.
Okay, thank you, David.
Nothing new to add.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing more other than I appreciate working with the city engineering staff and city administration on the concerns out by County Road 7 and 19 in that area, the truck wash in Magellan. And I had pretty extensive conversation with Magellan about the impact it has on them, and that issue that concerns them isn't anything new. I know we visited that again back in 2010, but I was able to talk to one of their facility coordinators and find out the severity of the impacts and actions that they've taken in order to minimize any impacts to them. But their loading rack was shut down for longer than 24 hours for that, and they were close to having to shut down some pumping stations. They had sandbagged around and protected them, but it doesn't create an environmental threat per se. But it certainly has an interruption of service. That facility is actually pretty critical in their area network of delivering refined petroleum products, and it's really pretty telling when a series of those terminals in an area like that are shut down. It has a pretty immediate effect on at least the perception of fuel supplies, which becomes kind of a bigger issue if you remember back to some of the public fears after 9/11 and some of the panics. So I think that there's a lot of reasons for us to push hard in anything that we can do to expedite getting something done. I think there's probably a willingness for all the people affected to participate in the solution. And I think that makes it an opportunity for us to probably do something significant out there that'll give a lot of relief to that problem. And I think it's long overdue. So I fully support it, and both as my position on council and my day profession, it has a significant impact and effect on that too. So I've also talked to Magellan that I will do everything I can on that end to cooperate on that side too to protect them environmentally. So I applaud the efforts, and I'll be fully engaged to support that.
You know, one of the things I came across from the federal government is that in this water mitigation and when we have storms like this, the runoff, and you know, a lot of the runoff comes because we've asphalted things and we've got concrete and those aren't porous, so they run off. Well, it was interesting that the federal government has utilized, I don't know who the scientist was, but they found a porous concrete that they're putting around Yellowstone now at Old Faithful. So that water, because there's a lot of concrete out there that they put for the park, and the water just runs off in an unnatural way, so it diverts from Old Faithful, which is not so much faithful anymore. It's starting to lose its track. And this porous concrete is stronger, porous, so the water just goes right through it, so you wouldn't have runoff concerns. Might be something to think about in the future when we replace concrete. It's stronger, it lasts longer, and it's porous. So sounds like a win-win-win.
At a previous meeting, a number of individuals from the community that were concerned about rental housing issues came before the city council. And I know that they were going to be meeting with city staff and hopefully getting those issues resolved. I guess what I'm wondering is, have those issues been resolved to their satisfaction? We talked briefly about maybe having a rental housing ordinance for the city of Marshall. Is that something we still need to pursue and take to the Legislative and Ordinance Committee, or is that a dead issue? I guess I'd like to know where we are on that issue. Is the rental ordinance needed, or do we have enough protection for the tenants now that we don't need a rental ordinance?
As part of my update, okay. I am gathering information on the food vendor issue and rental housing, rental code issues. As you suggested, let's see what's out there, so I'm gathering that information. We will need to bring it to Illinois, I do believe, on those two issues, as well as ordinance compliance with statutes related to manufactured homes.
Okay. And I hadn't heard, so I just wanted to know what the status was, and thank you for informing us.
Just gathering the information.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move then to agenda item number 16, staff reports. Sharon.
Mr. Mayor and councilmen, just a brief follow-up to some of the flooding. Tomorrow, staff will be meeting with FEMA. They're going to do kind of a damage assessment, and our public works director will be present with some figures and numbers, and we have a listing of property damage. We're not entirely confident of individual assistance, even though we've been tracking and acquiring that. That's a decision that's made by others outside the city of Marshall. However, we do know that there are still needs out there, and we've talked about forming a recovery committee for the city of Marshall, and we'll find out a little bit more about that as we discuss further. And then once we know more, we can communicate that to the citizens. A little bit more on County Road 7. A couple points I do want to make. I do not know the timeline. I do know we have not received a response from the Department of Transportation on our communication to them. And if a part of the solution is drainage to the diversion channel, whether it be a repair or an improvement, it would likely involve a Corps of Engineers permit. And for any of you who have experienced a Corps of Engineer permit, they do not move fast. It takes time, and they have their process. So we will, though, to the two councilmen who were contacted, continue to update you so you can respond to your constituents on that particular topic. Three other real brief items. Also at the Merit Board meeting, we did briefly talk about the $3.1 million in bonding funds that the city of Marshall was awarded. I know that Jasmine Dismet, the coordinator, has been working with the state on the grant funding, and a brief discussion with Public Works Director Olson today. We're going to talk about next steps, and we believe, I think we're at the engineering phase, and we may want to consider RFPs. And I didn't update, I don't think you, Councilman Schaefer, on that, but that's something we might be looking at, and we'll keep you updated on that. Briefly, I just want to say the intern who's been working under me for the last several weeks, like that, he's been doing some research, and one of the research items we have him working on is comparable data with the city of Marshall and other communities. And I know Councilman Sturek has been pushing us to be better about getting out that data and posting it and making it available. And one of the things that we do want to make sure is that people are going to look at it, and how we present that's going to be important. So we're still working on that. But one of the questions I asked Loic is, how do we compare? And he said, not too bad. So more to come on that. But I think that's a fair and unbiased perception of the initial data that he's collected. So I appreciate your work on that. And then finally, I did put an insert or a memo into the council packet, and it's relatively maybe not a large deal, but I did want to get consensus and before changing what you get in your packet. And one of the things that the staff tries or attempts to do is updates a pending items list, which has been provided in the council, paperless packets and hard copies for those that get the packets. And then on the off weeks, there's an administrative brief that's emailed out. And I'm proposing, and this is a discussion at division head meeting, and supported by the division head, is that we would like to present the administrative brief as part of the council packet. And I think this provides for greater transparency and communication with those that look at the council packet, and could give an insight into the activities of the city that most residents don't know at this point. So we would, on a monthly basis, provide an administrative brief, and I'm not sure what we would call it. Maybe we'd keep calling it administrative brief, but it'd be more of a city departmental update and message as far as what we're doing. And then the pending items list, we would review that twice a month at the staff level. It seems to be more of kind of a project activity listing than it is a policy budget levy driven 30,000 foot level type review that you as councilmen are typically looking at in your role. And with the exception of Public Works Director, who has projects and they're on timelines, they're pretty specific. Some of them, or if not all of them, are ongoing, and I'll pick on the city assessor, a lot of his pending items are cyclical. They're the same year after year, and things do come up, but I just think there would be more information and to the citizens in the council and administrative brief as part of council packets versus pending items. And my question to the council is, if we would do that, is that okay with the council?
It's fine with me. My only concern is that fit within the workflow of your department. If that puts pressure on assembling the agenda.
We discussed during that first council meeting of the month, and Kathy Lee would ensure that that we would meet the deadline. And right now she's kind of pulling teeth once in a while because we're busy and get caught behind things. But if it turns into a monthly thing, I think Kathy would do a pretty good job in ensuring that it is completed. And I know that I did an email update early on, and I've kind of slacked myself a little bit on that because it's gotten really busy for me. And one of the comments on my evaluation was, be nice to get some updates. So I hope we can make this more complete than it currently is.
Any other input? Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Well, there's highlighted issues that were brought up by Council tonight, and kind of thought that might come up. So, Dennis, if you could help me on this. I think at least I was surprised by the random nature of the flooding problems throughout the city. You don't have to see exactly where these are, but you can see that they're scattered around town. And so what we're trying to do is define specific reasons for the issues at these locations. Councilmember Sturrock brought up the issue right here. And you can see there is a concentration of pink areas in this location that were definitely from sanitary sewer backup. Now, how to remedy that? We've already been working with the wastewater department and Bob Van Moore about what we can do with the lift station to identify methods of alleviating that immediately. What happens is the lift station, of course, is a force main, or creates a force main that discharges into a gravity flow sewer a couple blocks south of that lift station. So really where the backups occur is where that force main discharges sanitary sewer into a gravity system that backs up. So during this event, we had to bypass the normal procedures and pump the sanitary sewer to the storm system in order for that to alleviate the sewer backups. Well, one of the remedies to take care of that is we aren't going to be remedying the nature of the overflows to the lift station, but we could establish a location for setting up temporary pumps to bypass it immediately instead of waiting for the sewer backups to occur. So that's something that we'll certainly be discussing with Councilmember Schaefer in the methods by which we would propose that. But that's just an example of that. Another area, of course, was the truck wash west on 19th. The runoff that we experienced there during any significant event, and I'm going to say a significant event is anything over a 25-year storm, okay? Not the big events like we just had. Anything over a 10 or 20-year storm is a significant event. Now, where does that water come from? The water that flows through that area comes from the agricultural field just to the west of there and flows over land and normally picks up about a few tons of corn stalks that blocks the drainage in the ditch, and it goes around and flows through the pipeline and through the parking or through the truck wash and that whole area. That sheet flows through that area. So the way to take care of that, of course, involves state of Minnesota, Lyon County, City of Marshall, residents, and people outside the city limits. That is a very significant contributor to that runoff. It happens in the spring during snow melt, and it happens during rainfall events. But what we're looking at doing is trying to model that system, where the water comes from, how much it is per event, of type of event, and how to get that to the bypass channel, which we are calling this a maintenance issue. We are calling it a maintenance issue of an existing thing that's going there. Another real significant area we have is along Legion Field Road. It starts from the area just west of the concrete plant, where the drywall is. All that area is covered with concrete, and all of it runs off right now. And the area used to come through the railroad tracks. There's a large culvert through the railroad tracks, but on the north side of the railroad tracks is Parkway 2. And there's a large berm along there. And there's a drain tile that drains that area that has like a 40-inch culvert through the railroad tracks into a 6 or 8-inch tile. And that's what drains it. So instead it flows overland to Legion Field Road, those areas there, along there. It doesn't take much of an event. The last 2-inch rain we had turned it back into a significant pond. That's it. Also where MMU has a switch station, and that was out of power. That was flooded, significantly flooded. It was out for about 40 minutes, less than an hour, but created some backup areas in that neighborhood. So that area then flows along the south side of the railroad tracks down to the area of the turkey plant, crosses over and goes through Parkway 3. So from Parkway 3, we'll have to get that water over to the channel. So what we're intending to do is identify a request for proposals, or at least one proposal that identifies the drainage area, defines the design storm that we're going to design the system to, and then implement, if we can, a runoff project that will at least address, to a point, all of those issues from the concrete plant all the way through Parkway 3. So I would expect that on the interim, right now, we would not want any more development on the north side of Parkway 3 than currently exists. No problem with the one that's been approved. But we may have the need for a significant ponding and pumping station to get that water out of there on the long term for the city. So that's approved. That's approved, and no issue with that we can see. So, but we're going to need to address that entire drainage area because of what really exists there at this time. The other areas, there were general backups. I'm going to say most of them were from stormwater, not from sanitary sewer. Some areas might have had sanitary sewer backups. And we want to start addressing the issues that we've had for years, and that is the sump pump connections to the sanitary sewers, because we went from 3.5 million gallons a day to 15 million gallons a day, some with direct connections, some with sump pump connections. Now, we will be meeting with FEMA, like Cher said, tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I'm going to try to get the information of when does the emergency declaration, how long does that extend for this system? I think it's important that we try to identify issues with the system under the emergency phase, because there are provisions that we can do under emergency that we might have a more difficult time with permitting under a regular non-emergency phase of the system. But you can see that it was widely scattered with some specific areas of more concern. This isn't the entire map. This is the map as of today at the wastewater plant. All of the areas that were called into the emergency call system are included on here. Kyle indicated that he might have up to a dozen more spots that have come in since then for damage and things like that. We'll include those on the map. But you can see that we are in the process of identifying areas, trying to identify reasons for each of them, because they probably are not all the same everywhere. Sometimes it's size of culvert, sometimes it's, well, I think we do not, and we will never be designing our systems for the 1% event. We just can't do that. So we need to understand and expect flooding when issues like that take place. I'll stop there. I could go on for a long time with things like this.
Greg, you have a
Question or comment, Glenn? Back to the issues, the kind of the big picture, that highway, County Road 7 and Highway 19 in general. One of the approaches when you're talking to FEMA is that I'd suggest that we at least plant a seed with them that might possibly be something that I think we could contend could fit into mitigation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think both this one and the sanitary sewer might be mitigation projects.
Yeah, and I think also this flood that you just described with the issues of, you know, everything new flowing into something that was pre-exist or old and that it's not sized.
Great.
But again, I mean, I think that, you know, the thing about County Road 7 is that there's not a lot of public infrastructure damage, but you don't have to squint to see a bad case scenario. And I think if you look at security along with the potential environmental, had something bad happened at Magellan, and it didn't because they're pretty prepared and they took a lot of action fast to make sure that nothing got threatened. I think that still speaks well for a mitigation project, because if you think about everything that could have happened bad, what's downrange of that, that thing snowballs pretty quickly. So I really recommend doing that, pushing that forward as a mitigation proposal.
Another issue that we have there is that they had previously tried to do a little bit of berming and diking. They did the berming and diking with gravel, and of course when the water came up it just washes that out. The other issue is when you start ideas like berming, like maybe even clay dike around it, what that does is concentrates that flow coming out of that field to a ditch, which then creates the problem in the ditch section a lot larger. Then all that water has to come through the culverts that you might install. So that's why it is important for the county, state, city, private property owners to be engaged in this process. And like I said, most of that water comes off of the agricultural field to the west.
When you and Jason shot inverts out there, elevations, the bottom of the invert where we transect into the channel, that's still lower than the current bottom invert of the County Road 7 culvert, correct?
Yes.
So it's still a viable outlet if we take care of some of the bottlenecks and some of the elevation problems in between, like the Helena approach on our property and some of those. We may not solve the problem, but we could probably improve the result at least interimly while we're waiting for other permits.
Yep. And I will say, once the design is agreed upon, that it will not preclude a 50 to 100 or 1% to 2% event. It will not preclude that. And that's important for people to understand, because I've seen it before where you make an improvement and the next flood that you get, what did you do wrong?
Happened,
And we still got flooded. But I think we'll stop there. And like I said, we'll be meeting with FEMA tomorrow, just kind of to get the process right. We also, I'll go on to the next item.
I was just going to ask you about this. When you do these proposals and so forth, do you consider cost benefit, the costs that we're going to have to fix it versus the benefits you're going to get from it? Is that considered in your analysis? And the second question is, you talked about a mitigation program. I'm not sure what you're talking about there.
Mitigation, yeah, mitigation means to do something
Right,
to
I know what mitigation means. but-
Okay, to reduce the impacts to the landowners around it.
Without getting into the real complicated FEMA diatribe, but FEMA has two programs and they do their declaration, and it's only for public infrastructure damage. FEMA doesn't come in to relieve private residents. It doesn't come in to relieve private business. It's only for public infrastructure. There's impacts directly related to the storm. Those are damages, but then they look long-term on the recovery end of it, and they look for, are there mitigation opportunities to either minimize or eliminate the impacts to public infrastructure or the potential. This one would be a potential mitigation proposal, and it's potential because we're not trying to alleviate something that got damaged, but it came close enough to creating a problem. I think we could at least have a conversation to see if there's participation from FEMA in trying to alleviate the flooding out here.
It could have created a problem with County Road 7.
An example of that is the large storage pond north of the college that was a mitigation project to relieve the
Right.
That worked very well.
Yes.
During the system. Okay, another one, we are having a pre-construction conference with the J-turns on Highway 23 and East Lion Street. So that's tomorrow. I would expect that project will start within a couple weeks. I've seen the sign companies going along the highway putting up signage for it now. The projects, of course, are slowed because of excessive rains, but they are coming along. The contractors are doing their due diligence on getting things done as quickly as possible. They're working on Marguerite and South Bend and Saratoga Street, and we'll be starting on the project in the industrial park within a couple weeks. We did have a pre-construction conference for that 2 weeks ago.
Thank you, Dennis. Any other questions for Dennis?
Or for Glenn.
Or Glenn?
Yeah.
Either one. How about Dennis? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As Councilmember DeKramer indicated, the EDA is recommending that some property in Parkway 3 be sold. The owner of the property is HRA, so the HRA has to have a special meeting to approve of that. We'll be bringing that to the next council meeting. Also, the city is looking at buying some property from Mrs. Middleton on the Block 11, that storage building, that Middleton zone. I believe we've reached an agreement, but again, that we're subject to city council approval. So I'm going to be asking for approval to sell and asking for approval to buy in a couple of weeks. So continue to work on the unique opportunities process. The construction plans have been submitted. They are under review by the city right now.
Thank you, Dennis. We'll move then to agenda item number 19, the pending agenda items. Any questions about those? Agenda item number 20 is the information items, including building permits. Agenda item number 21 is the upcoming meetings. Which brings us, if there's no other questions or business, to agenda item number 22 to consider adjourning this meeting.
So moved.
Motion by David.
Second.
Seconded by Steve. Discussion?
Well, do we really want to adjourn?
If not, we'll move to a vote.
Just locked me out. There.
Motion passes. We're adjourned.